After surviving the threat of an American boycott, Nazi Germany welcomes a record number of athletes to Berlin for the Summer Olympics in 1936. The 2 weeks of competition and propaganda will prove to be one for the history books, literally, with some of the highest sports drama ever recorded. Victories by athletes like Jesse Owens and the University of Washington 8-man rowing crew will provide a ray of light in an otherwise dark chapter of the Olympic story. Raise the flag.
Light the cauldron.
We declare the Games Odyssey open. Welcome to the Games Odyssey podcast, your home for stories of glory from the Olympics and Paralympics. I'm Jonathan Jordan.
And I'm Sarah Patton. We both love the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and we love history. But most of all, we love Olympic and Paralympic history.
From the epic and inspirational moments we all love, to the more bizarre and controversial moments, we're fascinated by it all.
Which is why we are on a journey through all of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, from the ancient Olympics held at Olympia, all the way to now.
All right, this is starting to feel a little bit like a bad habit, but just like we've done for the past 2 episodes, we are giving a parental warning for this episode because it's Berlin 1936. The Nazis are in charge of Germany at this point, so there will be some discussions of Nazism, of racial prejudice, anti-Semitism, all those terrible things, so maybe not the best one to listen to with your kids unless you've had conversations with them or are willing to have those conversations with them. But anyway, so if you haven't listened to the past 2 episodes, we covered the 1936 games in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, which were the Winter Games, so the first time that the Nazis hosted. And then in the last episode, we really talked more about a lot of the events leading up to the Berlin Games and then the opening ceremony. And then we kind of hit the pause button. Now we're going to get into actually talking about the events, the athletes, some of the really more fun stuff. There's still going to be some difficult stuff mixed in because it's Berlin 1936, but there are some, again, there's a couple of bright spots in here, which is nice. So, Sarah, kick us off. What are some highlights for this episode?
With 49 participating nations and a record number of 3,963 athletes, Berlin 1936 would have the highest turnout yet, besting Paris 1924 by nearly 900 athletes, including the highest number of female athletes yet, which if you've been listening, we've been advocating, saying that we can't wait for more females. Just a shame it had to be Berlin.
Yeah, well, and it's still, it was around 300, I think 22 female athletes, so we still have a long way to go at this point before the numbers equal out, but it is good to see more women participating, regardless of who's hosting.
Yes. Berlin 1936 also saw the debut of basketball, canoeing, and field handball in the Olympics. Polo was also brought back after being left out for 1928 and 1932, but this would be its last appearance in the Olympic Games, at least so far.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it'll make a comeback one day. It's entirely possible.
If cheerleading can make it, polo might. Sorry, cheer people, come at me. I know, I'm sorry. It is a hard sport. It is. I'm not arguing that. Anyway.
It is.
Other than the medals, the medalist also received a winner's crown and a potted oak tree.
That's like I feel like that's a very modern thing. Like that's a very green thing to do. Like we're gonna give everyone a tree, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's a choice. And just saying. And of course, due to the outbreak of World War II, this would be the last Summer Olympic Games for 12 long years.
Yeah, so about that. We mentioned that with Garmisch, that we don't have the Winter Games for 12 years. Same thing here, obviously, with the Summer Games, because this is before we staggered Summer and Winter Games. So, Sarah, do you ever think about the lost generations of Olympians that were caused by the canceled 1940 and 44 games? Because, I mean, that's a huge gap of time, not to mention the loss of life during World War II that happened in between.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the loss of life. I think about how many people ended up fighting in World War II who would have been great athletes and never got a chance to compete. And yeah, you know, I want to be clear but if you're listening to this, you're probably an Olympic and Paralympic fan. So that's good. But I feel like some people would come at me saying like, oh, you mean that the Olympics are as important as life? And that's not what I'm saying at all.
No.
But for athletes that train their whole life for this, it's sad. It's sad. It's part of the grief of, I think, what was lost because of World War II, and dreams and hopes that they had. So, even last episode, we mentioned Louis Zamperini. He wanted to go back in 1940. And so even athletes that showed up in Berlin, they didn't get a chance to go back. I'm glad that they got their one shot, but just thinking about what other athletic feats could have been accomplished for some of these athletes, it's hard.
I mean, let's be real. More important things were going on in the world. But that shows you just the consequences of war, that these opportunities get taken away. I mean, this is why the Olympics exists, is to remind us that, hey, there's other ways that we can compete with each other that don't involve pointing a gun at each other. So anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I'll get off my soapbox, but...
Well, no, I was going to say pointing a gun, yes, but at a target.
At a target, yes.
But yeah.
Just not at each other. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tragic for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, but let's take a quick little break, and then we will come back and get into some of the actual sports. We're going to talk about basketball first, because it made its debut, and also because Sarah has not yet watched the Redeem Team on Netflix. So this is the reminder for her after we're done recording to go watch it, because it's excellent. But anyway.
Okay, that's good to know. If you're saying it's excellent, that means it's good, because we've already discussed that my bar is pretty low when it comes to film and documentaries. Yeah. So
well, but you did watch The Swimmers. Speaking of Berlin, because Berlin did, was a setting for The Swimmers, and it's excellent as well. But anyway,
great movie.
We're not a movie podcast. We'll get back to basketball here. So basketball made its Olympic debut here in Berlin, and frankly, it's kind of a shame it didn't debut at home in Los Angeles, 1932.
Agreed.
Why did that not happen? But I'll try to let that one go. Now, what is really cool is that a whopping 23 nations entered the tournament, making it the largest of the tournaments during the Olympiad. However, Spain and Hungary did withdraw before it started, so 21 teams actually competed against each other. Now, surprisingly, the tournament was held outside. Some sources I looked at said that this was Hitler's idea because he felt like basketball should be an outdoor game. Obviously, right? Like,
it's fun to play it outside, but I think at the highest level, inside makes a little more sense.
Inside does make a little more sense at the highest level, yes. But okay, so some sources say that was Hitler's idea, that he wanted it played outside, but officially it appears to have been by request of the International Basketball Federation, who wanted to experiment with the idea of an outdoor basketball tournament. And why not experiment with a new idea at the largest sports festival in the world, right? Like, what could possibly go wrong? Sarah, let me tell you what went wrong.
Oh, do tell.
The weather. Yes.
No.
So
I did not see that coming.
Shocker. Yeah. So there actually was no tennis at these Olympic Games, and since there was no tennis, the basketball tournament was played on the tennis courts because they didn't have basketball courts outside. So it sounds more like they were in flat lawns than even what we would think of as a tennis court today. And so that meant that when it rained, especially during the final, things got a little messy. So yeah, so that was the basketball tournament. Unsurprisingly, the US won the first gold, with silver going to Canada and bronze going to Mexico. So it was a North American podium sweep. Oh, and by the way, so far, these are the only medals Canada and Mexico have won in basketball. So there you go. Hasn't happened since.
Canada, you keep your hockey medals and...
Right, yeah. Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
These.
And then I thought this was a really fun fact, but James Naismith, who is credited as the inventor of basketball, was actually the one who handed out the medals during the medal ceremony. So, yeah, that's pretty fun right there.
And it is cool that James Naismith was there. So
yeah, super cool that he was there.
Which I've probably talked about this before, but I'm married to a man from Kansas who went to KU, which Kansas Jayhawks happen to be the reigning 2022 national champions in basketball. And they play, I think it's Naismith Court. Here I am like talking about it as if I know what I'm talking about. And then I'm like, wait, no, it's a Bog Allen Fieldhouse, but whatever. Anyway, all that to say, Rock Chalk, and Naismith is big name up in Kansas, and we love it. So anyway, I am not a Kansan. I am a Texan through and through, but guilty by association. Anyway, so it's cool that he was there. My husband will be very happy about this. But we're going to move on to cycling. In the 1,000 meter match sprint final, German cyclist Toni Merkens.
It's a really unfortunate name. I'm not going to go into why exactly, but if you know, you know.
Okay, I don't think I know.
I'll probably share it with you off air.
Okay, I'm like, do I need to start Googling?
Yeah, no, don't Google it right now.
Okay. Not right now.
Yeah, and for those listening who we've already given a parental warning, but yeah, don't Google that name in front of your kids. Yeah.
Good to know. Well, unfortunate name person Toni Merkens fouled Dutch cyclist Arie van Vliet. But instead of being disqualified for this, the officials decided to fine him 100 Reichsmarks and allow him to keep his gold. Not sure how I feel about that, but I'm also no expert in cycling. So cycling fans, what do you think? Should we just fine people when they probably should be disqualified?
Yeah.
Yeah, just fine Russia so that they can keep cheating. It's fine. Seems ridiculous. These were his only Olympics as he went pro the next year. He was then drafted into the German military during World War II and was injured while fighting on the Eastern Front. At the hospital where he was treated, he contracted meningitis and then passed away. Meanwhile, Van Vliet continued his cycling career, and even though these were his only Olympics, he ended up winning 13 medals at Worlds, the latest of which he won in 1957. Let that sink in. Besides his silver, he won in the 1,000 meter match sprint. He also won gold in the 1,000 meter time trial event where, he couldn't be fouled. Thank goodness. But that's a long career.
Yeah. Like the fact that he won a world's medal 21 years after these Olympic Games.
Yeah.
And I'm glad he did get gold, even though it kind of sounds like he should have had 2 golds, but I'm glad he did get a gold in the time trial. So
yeah, agreed.
But anyway, we're going to go over to diving for a second, and no huge shocker at this point in diving history, but U.S. men and women both swept the podium in the 3-meter springboard, and also in the 10-meter platform. The U.S. went 1 and 2 for both the men and women's competition, with Germany taking bronze in both men and women's. If you had trouble following my description, that means that of 12 total medals that were possible in diving, the U.S. won 10 of them. And Marshall Wayne, of that 10, he won 2 medals, gold in 10-meter platform and silver in 3-meter springboard. And then we also need to talk about Marjorie Gustring. She was a 13-year-old from the US, and she won gold in springboard diving, which was considered actually a surprise win because she had come in second to her teammate Catherine Rawls during the Olympic trials. She won on her final dive, which apparently Rawls recognized as a winner before the scores were even posted. Like the source that I read said she, judges hadn't even weighed in yet, and she walked over to Gustring and said, "Congratulations!" Like she knew she had won the gold. But anyway, Marjorie, at the age of 13 years and 268 days old, she's still the youngest female gold medalist for a summer sport. The only gold medalist, yeah, and think about how long ago that was. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and I don't see that being broken anytime soon.
Yeah, probably not. And so, to be fair, there's an age restriction now.
Right.
So that's part of why that has stood for so long, but still, it's something to think about. Mm-hmm. Now, the only gold medalist younger than her is Kim Yoon-mi, who won a gold medal in short track speed skating at the 1994 Lillehammer Winter Olympics. So, yeah, both of those records are going to stand for a long time because I don't see us going backwards with the age restrictions at this point. But that's a topic for another episode, I'm sure. So, now, after the 1940 Olympics were canceled due to World War II, the USOC was so convinced that Marjorie would have won another gold in diving had they been held, that they actually gave her a second gold medal. I honestly I don't know how they got away with this, but obviously it's not recognized as an official Olympic gold medal. I guess they just had one lying around, and they were like, well, if we had the 1940 Olympics, I'm sure you would have won gold. So here you go. Just take it home.
Yeah. If anyone has an extra gold medal lying around, just let me know what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm sure I would have won, right?
Golly.
Yeah, it's a weird story, but she ended up with 2 gold medals, even though she really only won 1. So there you go. Now, she did attempt to make it onto the 1948 Olympic team, but she came in 4th during the team trials, and so she just missed out on being able to go back to the games. But that's impressive, 12 years later, to still come in, 4th after probably maybe not having been in practice during some of that time either.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Very impressive.
Yeah. And then in 1976, she was inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. And then she passed away in 1992 after an accident at her home in California. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about swimming too, since we're already talking about things that happen in water. So we've got Hendrika Maashtenbroek of the Netherlands I want to talk about real quick, because she won 3 golds and 1 silver in swimming. I mean, she just dominated here at these games. And the secret to her success was she was an excellent sprinter. It's reported that in the 100-meter freestyle final, she was in 5th place at the 50-meter turn. And then she was in 3rd place when there were still 10 meters to go. And then she still eked out the win. She just had these incredible last-minute bursts of speed. And it's thought by some that the only reason she got silver in the 100-meter backstroke is because at one point she got tangled up in the lane ropes. So, yeah, that's so she could have maybe gotten 4 golds, except for that. She was also the anchor leg for the Dutch 4x100 relay, and with 20 meters left in the race, the German and Dutch teams were neck and neck, and then her sprint sealed the victory. Before the 400-meter freestyle final, fellow competitor Ragnhild Veger shared a box of chocolates with the other athletes, except for Hendrika. and she swore to get revenge for this snub in the pool. I mean, that you don't offer chocolate to everyone else, and that's just rude, right? That's just rude.
It's so rude.
That's not the Olympic spirit to offer chocolate to everybody else except for one person. So anyway, so back to her chocolate vengeance that she went after here. So Ragnhild Veger, she led the race for the majority of the time, but then with 25 meters left, Hendrika put on the gas and pulled ahead by 1 meter. So she got her vindication in the pool. And with that, she became the first woman to win 4 medals in a single Olympic Games. And she ended up donating one of her golds, get this, to raise funds for building a village for disabled individuals. So that's a really cool fact. Yeah, love it. And then I also want to throw in Inga Sorensen of Denmark, who won a bronze in the 200-meter breaststroke, making her the youngest Olympic medalist in an individual event. So we have a lot of young people here, just, winning medals all over the place.
Yeah. Well done, young children.
Yeah, yeah, right. And then while we're still in the water, we'll talk a little bit about water polo too. So let's take a moment to recognize the Hungarian water polo team who won their second gold in a row. One notable member of the team was swimmer Oliver Husheli. I need to redo that. Oliver Hulashi. There we go. Got it. Who is one of only a few Olympic athletes with a disability. Now, we've previously talked about Charlotte Cooper, who is deaf, and George Iser, who was an amputee. So Hulashi joins that list of Olympians with a disability. So at the age of 8, he was in a traffic accident involving a tram and had to have his left leg amputated below the knee. But this did not stop him from pursuing his love of swimming, and he won 25 Hungarian national titles. So he was kind of good at this. And then he competed in 3 Olympics total, all for water polo, where he won silver in 1928, then gold in 1932, and then here again, gold in 1936. So he won a medal in each one of his Olympic appearances. So that's fun. And then, even though he was exempted from military service during World War II because of his physical disability, he ended up being killed by a Soviet soldier in 1946 during an attempted mugging. He was only 37 years old. So sad. Yeah, again, just so pointless that he had to die in that way. But we love highlighting these stories of individuals who have a disability competing in the Olympics before there was a Paralympic movement, and the fact that he was able to compete in the same field as able-bodied athletes is just inspirational in of itself. So
yeah,
while his life was terribly cut short, we're grateful for his legacy for disabled athletes.
Yeah, definitely. So now we're going to talk about rowing.
Still in the water.
So yep, still in the water. Just row down the river with us. Have you read Boys in the Boat?
I have.
Great. If you're listening to this and you've not read or listened to it on audiobook, what are you doing with your life? Because it's a great book.
It is.
But let's talk about the 8-man rowing event. So that book does a far better job covering the story than we can do here. But it was a struggle for these guys just to get to the games.
Yeah.
Yeah, to say the least.
To say the least, yeah.
In fact, just 2 weeks before the games, the USOC said that they would not pay the team's traveling expenses, and they had to come up with $5,000 to pay their own way, or else the second place team from the trials, the crew from Penn, would go instead.
Yeah.
And, this is before GoFundMe was a thing, so...
yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's just terribly unfair, too, that it's like, well, we're going to pay for all these other people to go, but you 8 college kids and your boat and your coach, you got to cough up your own money.
Yeah, sorry. Good luck.
Yeah, awful.
It's crazy. University of Washington fans rallied to raise the money to get these boys to the Olympic Games for the spot on the world stage that they had earned. So good job, Washington fans.
Yep.
Then in one of the most dramatic finishes of the 1936 Games, the U.S. faced off with the German and Italian crews. Germany had the far more favorable inside lane, with the U.S. assigned to the far outside lane, even though most competitions would have put the U.S. in a more favorable position based on the times from previous rounds of the competition.
Yeah, again, he goes into a little bit more detail on that in the book, which is why you should read or listen to it, about how this was some kind of shadiness of here at this one competition. They were like, we're going to change the rules a little bit about the lane assignments. But anyway.
Convenient. It was very convenient.
Right.
And then Hitler was in attendance at the final. Germany and Italy took the lead, and it looked like a race for gold between those two. Then the U.S. came up from behind to cross the finish line just ahead of Italy and Germany. So we love a feel-good story like that.
We do. Yeah.
We're obviously biased. We're from the United States, but we like the college kids, and we also like the book. So I know we're biased, but it's a great story. I know people who don't even care about the Olympics that much, who have just fallen in love with the story and the book. So go read the book. And isn't there a movie version?
There is a movie version that is currently in post-production. It's being directed by George Clooney. You may have heard of him. And it'll be starring Joel Edgerton as crew coach Al Ulbrichtson. So looking forward to it.
Cannot wait.
Yeah, I'm hoping it does the book justice because it is such a good book. But yeah, if you've ever watched any of the rowing events in the Olympics, like what's amazing is just how calm and peaceful it looks. But that was the thing that amazed me about this book is the author just does such a great job of describing how hard rowing actually is. Like there were some passages in that book, just listening, I felt tired. Just some of the description. I was like, whew, that was a rough workout. I need to pause the book right now and go take a break, when I was literally just washing dishes while listening to it on Audible. So, but like, that's how good it is.
Have you ever watched a rowing competition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like in person?
Oh no, not in person. Okay. So no, I've watched it. On TV, of course.
Yeah. But, I mean, like, of course on TV, but yeah, it's exactly what it appears on TV, but we've stumbled across a rowing competition before, and it was actually in Oklahoma City at the Olympic Training Center that's there for rowing, which they've recently updated their sign to where it's now an Olympic and Paralympic Training Center, which is great to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're in North Texas like we are, or Oklahoma, highly recommend catching even like a high school or collegiate competition there. Beautiful area, but it certainly has earned my respect in a new way to watch it live and to watch these athletes and what they go through. So that's my spiel.
It's a good spiel for sure.
We're rowing fans, but can't wait for the movie.
Again, we want to fit in some good stories, and yes, we're aware of our bias, but we would be just as happy about this underdog story if it was anyone else who had showed up, the German and Italian crews, because I mean that's why Hitler was in attendance, was he really expected Germany to win here, and again, there may have been some things behind the scenes to try to kind of put them in the best position possible to do so, and it didn't exactly work out the way that they hoped. So let's take another quick little break, and then we'll come back and talk about gymnastics. So, gymnastics, 1936 Berlin. We need to talk about Konrad Frey of Germany. He ended up being the most successful athlete of these Olympic Games, winning a total of 6 medals, 3 of them gold. Okay. He won gold in parallel bars, pommel horse, and the team all around. And then he also won silver in horizontal bar and then 2 bronzes in floor and individual all-arounds. During World War II, he was a sergeant in the German army. He did survive the war, and he returned to the world of gymnastics as a coach and a sports teacher, and then eventually retired in 1967. And then we also need to talk about his teammate, Alfred Schwartzman, whose full name was Carl Alfred Marcus Schwartzman, just to get that out there. And he was the other most successful athlete of these games, winning 5 medals, 3 gold and 2 bronze. Now, considered by the Nazis as the epitome of Aryan athleticism, he ended up winning the gold in the individual all-around, gold in the team all-around, and his 3rd gold came in horse vault. And then his 2 bronzes came in parallel bars and horizontal bars. In 1939, Alfred was a paratrooper involved in the invasion of Poland by Germany, which is considered the start of World War II. The following year, he was severely wounded during the invasion of Dordrecht, Netherlands, and he was captured. A Dutch soldier named Shem Hayden was ordered to execute him. Shem happened to be an Olympic speed skater who had competed in the 1928 games. When he realized who Schwartzman was, he refused to kill him. Instead, he helped Schwartzman to safety, which, pause on that, I think that's, that's just kind of an interesting, display of sportsmanship in the middle of a war. Like, there's just something to be said about the Olympic spirit, like transcending even the terrible events that were happening, where he was ordered to kill this guy who was technically his enemy. And he said, no, he's a fellow Olympian. I'm going to help him get somewhere where hopefully he can recover. Right. So that's called not just taking the high road. That's called taking the highest road.
Right.
So anyway, back to Schwartzman for a second, because we have a little bit more for his story. So he was awarded 2 Iron Crosses, one for propaganda reasons that same year. And in 1945, he was captured again in Italy and imprisoned. Then after the war, he became the national gymnastics coach. So he did survive, even though he, should have been executed.
Yeah.
Like, by the normal rules of war, like, he shouldn't have survived, but he did.
I know.
So,
I know. I'm like, dude, you got captured again? Like, how are you still going?
Seriously, though. But anyway, so he became the national gymnastics coach for Germany after the war, and he actually competed at the Olympics himself once more in Helsinki 1952. Do that math in your head. In the sport of gymnastics. And he ended up winning a silver in horizontal bar at those games. So yeah, he was gifted, to say the least. And then we'll just kind of briefly note here, the only gymnastics competition for women at these games was the team all-around event, which was won by the German team, with Czechoslovakia taking silver and Hungary winning bronze. Now, this was also the first time American women competed in gymnastics at the Olympics, coming in 5th. So, again, we'll look forward to more inclusion of women in the sport and more opportunity for medals other than just the team event, but it's a start. So, but anyway, I'm going to kick it over to you for a little bit of football.
Goal! Okay, so we talked about how there was no football at Los Angeles 1932, but that was not LA's fault. It was FIFA's fault, which there's a lot of things that are FIFA's fault.
Let's just always blame FIFA for lots of things.
If you want to blame FIFA, there's probably a good reason to do so. Let's just call a spade a spade. FIFA created the World Cup in 1930 and decided not to participate in the 1932 games, both to promote the 1934 World Cup and also because they were revising some of the rules about players regarding their amateur status so that there would not be a conflict with the Olympics. Italy faced Austria in the final, which went into extra time. But early on in extra time, Italy scored, winning their first and only gold so far in Olympic football. The only other medal they've won since was when they took bronze in Athens 2004.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, the whole FIFA thing, especially, I mean, World Cup is on the brain right now because at the time we're recording this, the World Cup is happening. So it's everywhere. It's in the news. I've been trying to keep up with it
and it's like
as much as possible.
I don't know if this is your experience, but it seems like all of a sudden everyone's a soccer fan.
Well, that happens every 4 years in the US. Like anytime the World Cup comes around, like everyone gets excited. They make their brackets. They become a big soccer fan.
Unless it's the women competing, though, you usually don't have a United States team to cheer for because the men don't usually qualify, but they did for this one, so good on them.
But yeah, let's run over to athletics, okay?
Because I'm excited for you to talk about this one.
We have a lot going on here. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about Cornelius Johnson. So he was the first gold medalist of the 1936 games. Now he was from Los Angeles and he took gold in the high jump. And when he went back to LA, he planted his oak seedling that he received. And you can actually still see the oak tree in his old neighborhood. It's still there growing. Now, I did find out from a New York Times article that just came out back in May that apparently his tree is threatened with destruction to make space for luxury apartments. So there's some efforts to try to figure out maybe how to relocate the tree. And then, of course, this apparently is just a topic of conversation because I don't know if you saw this, Sarah, but there's also talk about moving Jesse Owens' oak tree that was planted from one of his saplings that he brought back to the U.S. So
interesting.
Apparently, yeah. So there's at least those two trees from the 1936 games that are still around and growing. But yeah, Jesse Owens, it just came out in the news that tree is getting moved officially, and then there's some efforts to try to figure out how to save Johnson's tree and try to keep it intact despite the development happening in that neighborhood. So anyway,
all right.
I don't know if there's a petition or anything for that, but I'm all for it because it's a little piece of Olympic history, living Olympic history. So
yeah.
And then let's talk about, you kind of briefly mentioned her before, but Elizabeth Betty Robinson.
Love her.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll see her referred to as Babe Robinson. She was originally from Illinois, and she was a 16-year-old who had never competed in athletics until one day when she was chasing after a train, as people do. And a teacher at her school spotted her doing this, and then later asked if she could time her as she ran down a hallway. Now, she would then compete in her first ever track meet only 4 months before the 1928 Summer Games, where she went to Amsterdam and became the first ever women's Olympic champion in an athletics event when she won the 100-meter and matched the world record. So yeah, so technically the Olympics were only her fourth track meet ever, and she won the final by half a meter and also earned a silver in the 4x100 women's relay. So, it was a little bit of an oversight on my part that we did not include her in 1928, but you're also going to see part of why it fits for us to include her here. 3 years after winning gold there in Amsterdam, in 1931, she was flying with her cousin in a biplane when it crashed, and she was severely injured. In fact, when her body was found by a man at the wreckage site, he thought she was dead, and he tossed her into his trunk and drove her to a mortician. She was unconscious for 7 weeks, and it took her 2 years to regain the ability to walk normally. So obviously, she did not go to the 1932 games. Okay, so now let's discuss why we're talking about her here in 1936. Well, because she really wanted to return to sprinting, but a long-term impact of her injuries from the plane crash was that she could no longer fully bend her left knee, so she couldn't get down into this crouch starting position, which meant she had a slower start than other runners. However, she could do relays. So yes, in 1936, she returned to the Olympic Games as part of the women's 4x100 meter relay. She was the third leg, and while Germany was in the lead during her leg, she gained enough ground that the US was then able to pull ahead during the fourth lap, and so she won her second gold medal. Which, what a cool story. Like,
yeah,
just amazing.
And I know that they have a couple of her things on display at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Museum. So a good friend of mine gifted my son a book called Unbeatable Betty. And it's her story, and it's a children's book, and it's great. So put that on your Christmas list if you've got little ones, or if you just want it. It's just a really well done book. And it's been great to read her story to my 3-year-old and just to be familiar with it, because it is incredible to survive a plane crash and come back. We love her, and we talk about Betty in our house because my kid loves her book, which of course he does. He likes anything with athletics and sports and
an American flag.
Yes, and country music, but yeah, the Olympics and country music, those are his things.
Well, and it's just, I think most people would have regained the ability to walk and be like, good enough, you know, especially the fact she couldn't crouch for the start. I think most people would have been like, well, you know, I had a good run, no pun intended on that one, actually. And I'll just let it go. But the fact that she said, no, I'm making it back to the Olympic Games however I can, and that, you know, she did that through the relay was really, really amazing. So yes. So she did later marry a man named Richard Schwartz, and she stayed connected with the world of athletics as an official timekeeper for the AAU. And then in 1971, she was inducted into the National Track and Field Hall of Fame here in the U.S., which deserved. So,
definitely.
But yeah, so she gets a 10 in my book. And speaking of 10s, let's go over to the decathlon.
Oh, man. One of the athletes to catch Hitler's eye at the games was U.S. decathlete Glenn Morris, the son of a California pinto bean farmer. Coming into the games, he was the favorite to win as the world record holder, and he did not disappoint, setting a new world record of 7,900 points to win the gold. Hitler even offered Morris $50,000 to stay in Germany, which he declined, and good for him. Sorry, Hitler, no money would convince me to stay.
Yeah.
I guess he had the look, but
right.
Good job, Glenn. Way to get out. But Hitler was not the only one who paid special attention to Morris. He also gained the attention of filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl herself, and it's been reported that two of them, well, they had a romantic tryst during the game. So when you hear those stories of the Olympic Village, maybe that's what we had going on here.
Yeah, a little bit.
Riefenstahl later claimed to have been in love with Morris, and Morris also once wrote to his brother Jack saying he regretted the decision not to stay in Germany with her. However, I think we all agree he made a good choice to leave.
He made a good choice. Yeah, for sure.
He enjoyed a bit of fame following the games, like a ticker tape parade in New York City, and became the second Olympic champion to portray Tarzan on film. Remember old Johnny Weissmuller?
Yeah.
So I guess that's a thing.
It's a thing. You go to you win the Olympics, and then you get to be Tarzan.
Yeah, cool trend. He also signed on to play professional football with the Detroit Lions, though he only played 4 games before getting injured. During World War II, he briefly served in the U.S. Navy, though it said he was left with mental health issues afterwards, which common.
Yeah, absolutely.
According to Total Olympics, following this, he worked various menial jobs and struggled with alcoholism and lived out his days in veterans hospitals in California before dying in 1974.
Yeah.
So very, very sad. Not entirely uncommon for that generation, but super tragic.
Yeah, it's sad. Like, story kind of started off, pretty well, and then kind of goes downhill after that.
Hmm.
So after that sadness, let's maybe have a positive story.
Yeah, I got you. I got you. Let's jump into it. So, a heartwarming story came in the pole vault competition.
Hmm.
Gold went to Earl Meadows of the United States, but the real story here is in the silver and bronze positions. Two athletes from Japan, Shuhei Nishida and Sueo Oe, both vaulted 4.25 meters. The two were friends, and when they were told they needed to do another jump off to decide silver and bronze, they refused, wanting to share the honor of silver. But the IOC would not allow this. The
Boo.
decision, I know, the decision for silver and bronze was booted to the Japanese Olympic Committee, who decided Shuhei would get silver since he vaulted the height on his first attempt, whereas Sueo had required 3 attempts to match it. Back home in Japan, the two friends decided to take matters into their own hands. They had their medals cut in half and then melded together to create 2 unique half silver, half bronze medals called Medals of Friendship. Nothing like this had happened before, and due to rule changes made for deciding ties, it's never happened again. Oe died fighting in World War II, and his medal presumably passed to a family member. Nishida lived until 1997 and gave his medal to Waseda University in Tokyo, where it is to this day. Yeah, that's so sweet.
It is. It is. Yeah, it's such a sweet story of just two friends who said, no, we want to share this honor together. And even when we're told we can't, we're going to make it happen anyway.
I
So,
know. I'm a little irritated because I've been to Waseda University and I'm irritated that if it's on display, I didn't find a way to see it. But one day we'll
yeah.
go back. It's fine.
Yeah, you'll have to just ask around. Surely someone will point you the
Hmm.
right way.
Yeah,
So,
like I would
I
assume it's
mean,
in a library or something, but
yeah, I mean, at least my experience in Japan is everyone there has always been very helpful when we were
yes.
lost and needed
Oh yeah,
directions.
they don't give you directions. They take you there.
Yeah, we at one point, I think it was our first trip to Japan. We were looking around trying to figure out which way to go to, because at this time Google did not do super great in other countries. And so we were
Hmm.
trying to figure out which direction to go to get to a certain building. And this guy walks up to us and he was like, "Hey, what are you looking for?" Speaking great English. And we told him, and he said, "Oh, yeah, let me walk you over there." So we start following him. And he said, "Yeah, I actually give up half of my lunch break every day to come over here and help tourists
Oh my
because people."
goodness.
Yeah, he said tourists always get lost in this part of the city. So I always look around for people like you who look like they are trying to figure things out, and I get them go in the right direction. And like literally he walked us until we could see the building we were headed towards and then said goodbye and walked off. And I was like, what in the world just happened here?
Uh,
It
but like that's so Japan. That's so Japan. Like
is.
there
It
were
is.
times that I was like comfortable figuring out where I was going, but I would
Mm-hmm.
try not to show that I was looking at a map or something because I
Yeah.
felt bad that people would come and like take me places.
Right.
I'm like, no,
Yeah.
actually I can get this one. But yeah, they're just so kind. So it does not
Yeah.
surprise me that this story happened with a couple of Japanese guys.
Absolutely. But yeah, let's talk about the 800-meter final because this was another really exciting race in the games. So American John Woodruff got boxed in by other competitors, which if you've ever run in any kind of race, especially something like the 800-meter, or I've had this happen to me running the mile back in high school, when you get boxed in, it is incredibly infuriating because especially here at the Olympics, if you bump into another competitor, you can be disqualified, right? So that was his situation here. Is he's boxed in, he's in this terrible position, he doesn't want to bump into another competitor. So what does he do? He literally stopped running on the track. So he kind of forced the other runners to go around him because they didn't want to bump into him and be disqualified. And that freed him from being in the trap. Then he had to kick it into high gear, came up from behind, and won gold. I wish I could have seen this race because that's just bonkers. Like, some of the sources I read originally said that he just slowed down to a jogging pace, but then other sources said no. He, like, people who were there said he completely stopped on the track and then had to start running again. So, what a race.
One strategy.
Yeah. So after the Olympics, Woodruff went on to earn his master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh. And during World War II, he rose to the rank of captain in the Army. And then he re-enlisted during the Korean War to become a lieutenant colonel. And as if that wasn't enough, after moving to New York, he also coached young athletes, officiated at track meets, became a teacher in New York City, served as a special investigator for the New York Department of Welfare, was a parole officer, and a recreation director for the New York City Police Athletic League. So yeah, basically he was a superhero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, casual.
Yeah. As one of the 18 black athletes on Team USA for the 1936 Olympics, his story is also featured in the documentary you talked about earlier, Olympic Pride, American Prejudice. So yeah, you can go watch that and learn more about his life. Also featured in that documentary is Mac Robinson, who won silver in the 200 meter despite the fact that he broke the Olympic record during the final. Mac also happens to be the older brother to another distinguished black athlete who you might have heard of, Jackie Robinson, which I did not realize that. I did not put that together until looking this up. I was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Like,
it's one of my favorite trivia questions.
It's so fun. Yeah. So talk about a family filled with talent. Now, okay, so Mac Robinson broke the Olympic record during the final, but he still got silver. Well, who did he come second to? Well, come on. None other than Jesse Owens.
Of course.
Yeah. And so, okay, here's the deal. Even though Jesse's story has been covered many times by many people, we just can't ignore him here. And you can't talk about 1936 without talking about him, which is why we're going to give him his own episode. So, surprise, I guess we're turning Berlin 1936 into a trilogy. So, yeah, there was just too much to cover with him to fit in here. So, we will talk about his life story more in the next episode.
Yeah. Now, let's jump into another story. Which, if you're familiar with Jesse Owens, this name is probably familiar for you. We're going to talk about the long jump and a gentleman named Les Long. So coming into the long jump, Owens was already the world record holder heading into the games, but he would have to face off against Karl Ludwig Les, also known as Les Long of Germany. During the qualifying round, things did not start off so great for Owens when he thought he was making a practice jump, only to find out the officials counted it as his first attempt, which he scratched. He then scratched again on his second attempt, leaving him with only one more shot. On his third attempt, he decided to jump a few inches early to avoid scratching and trust he would get a long enough jump to qualify for the final, which worked. A story that circulated after the games was that Les had suggested this tactic to Owens, and another story that he had laid down a towel as a marker for Owens to aim for. But Owens later told Les's son, Karl, that these stories were not true and that the two never met until after the competition was over. During the final, the two athletes outjumped the previous Olympic record 5 times, with Owens finally taking gold with a jump of 8.06 meters. Long was the first to congratulate Owens on his victory, and the two walked arm in arm off the field in full view of not only the entire Olympic stadium filled with German fans, but with Hitler himself watching, which I'm sure he just loved that. Long and Owens wrote many letters to each other in the following years until their correspondence was interrupted by the war. In Long's last letter to Owens, he asked Jesse to contact his son Karl when the war was over, which Jesse did. Long was drafted into the German army and was injured during the Nazi invasion of Sicily in 1943. He died 4 days later in a British military hospital on July 14th and was buried there in Sicily. Owens later spoke about his friendship with Long, saying, "It took a lot of courage for him to befriend me in front of Hitler. I would melt down all the medals and cups I have, and they wouldn't be a plating on the 24-karat friendship that I felt for Luz Long at that moment." So another another sentimental story of friendship.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, it's great because it's true.
It is.
So,
yes.
Yeah, I don't know that Owens expected for him to come up and just congratulate him and then take him by the arm there in front of everybody. Like, that was such a huge deal, especially knowing the tension that these Black athletes were walking into there at the Olympic Games. So, yeah, just a cool story, and you can't talk about these games without fitting this one in, I feel like. So,
indeed.
But let's get over to the marathon, okay? Because, of course, we have to at least mention a little about the marathon.
Oh, well, yeah.
So, Team Japan finally claimed a victory here when Son Kite won and his teammate Non Shoryu came in third. But we do need to note that both of these runners were actually Korean, not Japanese. Son Kite's Korean name, so I mean his real name, let's just be real here, was Son Ki-chung, and Non Shoryu's Korean name was Nam Song-yeong. So the only reason they were running for Japan and forced to use Japanese versions of their names was because Imperial Japanese forces had already taken over the Korean peninsula by this point. Now, with his victory, Son became the first person of Korean heritage to become an Olympic champion. And with his winning time of 2 hours, 29 minutes, and 19.5 seconds, he set a new Olympic record. This was after he had already set a new world record the year before during a marathon in Tokyo. Son later told reporters he was ashamed to run for the Empire of Japan, and he refused to acknowledge the Japanese anthem during the medal ceremony. To this day, though, the IOC still recognizes his medal as belonging to Japan to avoid historical distortions. Now, originally, the plan was for the marathon winner to also receive a Corinthian helmet from the 8th century BC. So, Sarah, do you remember way back when we talked about the 1896 games? We talked about our good buddy Spiros getting the like ancient ceramic bowl.
Yes.
So, kind of the same idea here. This helmet had been found in Olympia, Greece during an excavation, and they were like, hey, let's give this to the marathon winner at the next Olympic Games.
That's so cool.
I know, isn't it though? But because of the value of the helmet, the IOC was afraid that this would constitute a financial payment, and therefore they would end up violating their own amateur rules. So the helmet was instead donated to the Berlin Museum. But some good news, Son finally took possession of the helmet that he had won in 1986, and he donated it to the National Museum of Korea. So presumably, I guess it's still there. And then following the Olympics, he went on to become a coach, and two of his athletes went on to win the Boston Marathon in 1947 and 1950. And most notably, he also coached Hwang Young-cho, the gold medalist in the marathon for the 1992 Barcelona Summer Olympics. So things really kind of came full circle for him, even though he didn't get to represent Korea when he won his gold medal. He did get to coach an athlete, a Korean athlete who did. So that's really fun. Now, when Seoul hosted the 1988 Summer Olympics, he got the chance to represent his country when he was given the honor of bearing the Olympic torch into the stadium during the opening ceremony. So I love that they didn't forget him, you know, even though he was forced to represent a different country because of the political climate at the time. I love the fact that the Seoul organizer said, hey, we we got to have him as part of the ceremony here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm sure that was probably a really special moment for him at that point. He ended up living to the age of 90. He passed away of pneumonia on November 15th, 2002. And it would not be until 2011 that the IOC would officially recognize Son's Korean heritage in his official Olympic profile. So if you look this up on your own, you're going to often see his Japanese name he was forced to use listed instead of his rightful Korean name. So that can lead to some confusion there. Again, this kind of just paves the way a little bit for what we're going to see happening during the war. We have all these things already happening with Imperial Japan, with the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a lot of red flags here for what's about to happen in the world.
Yeah.
But had you ever heard his story at all?
I had not. No, this is one that flew under the radar for me.
Yeah, me too. No, same. I had never heard this story at all, and it really threw me off at first when I started looking it up, because I was like, oh, cool, the Japanese finally win the marathon because they love the marathon so much.
Right.
And then I started digging deeper. I was like, oh, wait, he's not Japanese. He's Korean, but he's got the Japanese flag next to his name. Like, what's going on here? So, again, historical things happening that he could not control, but I'm glad that he got the chance to represent his country in different ways.
Definitely.
As a coach and as a torchbearer.
Yeah, he left an incredible legacy, for sure.
And before we get to the legacy of these games, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and wrap it up. Okay, Sarah, let's talk about the legacy of these games. What are we looking at?
Well, the games closed on August 16th with the final medal table tally looking like this. Germany won a whopping 101 medals, including 38 golds. The U.S. came in second with 57 medals, 24 were gold. Italy won 27 medals, 9 gold. And it should be mentioned that while Hungary won 16 medals total, 10 of those were gold, meaning that they won the third most gold medals for these games, which, good for them.
Yeah, and again, that kind of reopens the ongoing debate about the medal table.
Yeah.
Do you count medals or do you count golds? So that's why we're making sure we get Hungary in there with their 10 gold. The big question here that we kind of started off in part one was Hitler's plan here for Aryan superiority being on display. Did it work? Well, sorta. Now, his plans for the Olympics to showcase Aryan superiority didn't go exactly off the way that he had hoped, thanks in particular to Jesse Owens, as we already talked about, and as we'll share about more in his own episode. But as you just showed us, Germans won the most medals and golds at these games, so it still unfortunately gave Hitler some Aryan bragging rights, which is not great. Also, in total, the games were considered a massive success for Germany, raising the bar for the scale and grandeur of the Olympic Games. There was a lot of positive feeling towards Germany after the games, and a lot of fears about Hitler and the Nazis were assuaged, especially there in Europe. And that certainly helped the Nazis when they annexed the Sudetenland in Austria in 1938, which is kind of why people decided to turn a blind eye. It was partially because of the goodwill that he had built up. Also, the IOC felt warmly enough towards the Nazis that in June of 1939, when Japan had to relinquish their hosting duties for the 1940 Winter Olympics, which were planned for Sapporo, they unanimously voted for Germany to host again at Garmisch. But then just 3 months later, Germany would invade Poland, starting World War II. For these obvious reasons, the Berlin Games are now seen as a blight on the Olympic movement, since Hitler and the Nazis largely used the Games for political and propaganda purposes.
Yeah. Due to the outbreak of war, the 12th Olympiad of 1940, scheduled for Tokyo, Japan, would be rescheduled for Helsinki, Finland. But then when Finland allied itself with Germany as the war escalated, the 1940 Games were straight up canceled, as was the 13th Olympiad of 1944. The Olympic flame would not return to the Summer Games until London, 1948. The Berlin Games would also be the last under IOC President Henri de Baillet-Latour, which now that we know how he and his wife really felt about the Nazis and Jewish people, well, there's no love lost there.
Yeah.
When he died in 1942, Siegfried Edström became the fourth president of the IOC. But more on that later, as usual.
Yeah, for sure. Because, there will be a lot to talk about when we get to 1948. Those were also, of course, you and I think all the Olympic Games are important. But in terms of historical significance, 1948 is a big one as well, given how recently the war had ended. Mm-hmm. So we'll have a lot to say about those games when we get there. And then, of course, kind of like we already mentioned, there's been a ton written about the 1936 Berlin Games. Movies, documentaries, books, there's a ton of stuff out there. So if you're really interested in this topic, hopefully this is just more of an intro for you than anything else. There's no shortage of stories from these games, and obviously we would recommend Boys in the Boat as a good place to maybe start. But hopefully we got to share something new with you. I think both of us discovered a couple of new stories here ourselves. So, but anyway, if you enjoyed this episode,
and we really hope you did,
then come back next time when we will wrap up our conversation about 1936 with an athlete profile on the one and only Jesse Owens and his stunning Olympic story. But until then, Odyssey ya later.
The Games Odyssey podcast is a production of Wardrobe Media LLC. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jonathan Jordan and co-hosted by Sarah Patton. Show notes, including research sources and transcripts, can be found on our website, gamesodyssey.com. Olympic is a trademark of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC. Any use of Olympic in the Games Odyssey podcast is strictly for informational, commentary, and educational purposes. The Games Odyssey podcast is not an official podcast of the USOPC and is not sponsored, endorsed, or officially affiliated with the USOPC or the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. The content of Games Odyssey podcast does not reflect the opinions, standards, views, or policies of the USOPC, and the USOPC in no way warrants that content featured in the Games Odyssey podcast is accurate.